Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. I'm super grateful you're here. If you missed Biden's speech yesterday about Afghanistan, I'll just give you the brief cliff note right here. Everything in Afghanistan is wonderful, and everything went perfectly, except for all the things that went terribly, and those were somebody else's fault. That's all you need to know. There's no debacle here whatsoever. Also, this debacle was caused by Trump, clearly. Called it a mission of mercy. Never heard that term used yet until he used it yesterday with unparalleled results. And it was all everybody else's fault, all at the same time. Biden's speech yesterday, oddly, never at night. He hasn't given any speeches at prime time throughout all this. They're always in the afternoon, which is weird. There's going to be another big speech, another victory lap speech coming up on September 11th. Get ready for that, pretending like none of this ever happened. But yesterday he came out hot, yelling at you about what a great success all of this was with his fake bravado. He's given this pretty much exact same speech a couple times now, but every time he gives it, it's in a little bit different tone, right? So the first time, it was a very dismissive, just blow it off tone, right? I remember he was talking to George Stephanopoulos and he said, hey, that was 4 or 5 days ago, Jack. And it was 2 days ago, and the very first speech he gave, he came out, the whole world's waiting for him to talk about Afghanistan, and he came out, he started talking about the budget. All right, so that was his initial dismissive tone. Then the next speech he gave was like this sad, somber, weepy tone. And now last night was the angry, yelling at America tone. And none of them landed because it's not about the tone. It's about the truth. It's about accountability. He never took it. He's never taken it. He never will. People see right through it. You can't call this an extraordinary success. In what way could this possibly be an extraordinary success? What, are you kidding me? He talked about the 117,000 people that have been evacuated. We talked about this number yesterday. That is a intentionally misleading number. That includes all the countries that have been evacuating people. It includes all the private efforts to evacuate people, where, as we talked yesterday with a Army Ranger, the biggest hurdle with all these private people getting Afghans and citizens out is the United States government. But then Biden turns around and takes credit for that. It says 117,000 people have been evacuated. The United States military, United States government's responsible for about 60 to 70,000 of those. And we have no idea really how many citizens there. We don't really know who those 60 and 70,000 people even are. But Biden comes back and says, no nation has ever done an airlift like this before. Yeah, Joe, because no president has ever screwed up like this before. Blame the Afghan government again. Blame Trump again. Blame the Afghani soldiers again. And he threw a new one in there, which is a nice little twist here, right? He blamed the American citizens who hadn't left yet. He blamed them for being left behind. You were warned. We warned you. This is your fault. Blaming the Americans that he abandoned. We sent you emails. Didn't you get the emails? We sent you the emails. Snooze, you lose, guys. Snooze. We told you back in March you shouldn't have been here. Oh, and also, Joe, you said that it will be at least 6 months before the Taliban takes over. You repeatedly gave false assurances to the people there. This is Joe Biden just a couple weeks ago.
But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Come on, Americans. What's the problem? You didn't check your spam folder. Ah! Spam! All these emails from the State Department in your spam folder. Ah! Highly unlikely. Huh. You said a few weeks ago that the embassy would be staying open. The embassy did not stay open, by the way. But he decided to blame the people who stayed behind for being left behind. How about that one? Then he went on to brag that we only left some people behind. Just some. Check out this sentence. This is a surreal sentence from Joe.
The bottom line, 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave.
What? That is so surreal. That's not good. That's not good at all. I mean, maybe that's good for government work or something, but it's leave no man behind. Not leave around 10% of men behind. This is not the stuff of victory laps. That is such a wild quote right there. And the fact that people are not as outraged as they should be is a very bad sign for the future of our country. So here's the question. Who do you believe about how well things are going there? Have gone and will continue to go. Who do you believe? Do you believe Joe? You believe Joe Biden? You believe the president? You believe these guys? The generals and all the rest? How could you possibly? This is a CIA station chief. So this is out of the New Yorker. New Yorker wrote this article about Afghanistan. And they quoted a former CIA station chief. He expressed despair. Quote, "It's hard to believe that we've abandoned the Afghans so overwhelmingly. We created this society, like it or not. We encouraged women to go to school and work, and now they're being taken as war brides." Okay, so let's just stop there just for 1 second. War brides. Like, we don't even have a space in our brain for a war. What's a war bride? You know what I mean? So we have no concept for the evilness that's happening there right now. War brides. So the guy who wrote this article, the New Yorker, the guy who interviewed the former CIA station chief, he was abducted 12 years ago by the Haqqani network. Right? So the Haqqani, you may have heard this term before, the Haqqani, they're an offshoot of the Taliban. So 12 years ago, this reporter was abducted with 2 other Afghan guys, and he was held in captivity, I don't know, like a cave or something, held in captivity in the mountains of Pakistan for 7 months, all right? He's the interviewer, right? So then the CIA guy questions the interviewer and says the Haqqani network's leader is now the Afghan capital's security chief. So the CIA guy says, yeah, the guy who kidnapped you is now the head of security in Kabul. Is he going to be a nice guy? I don't think so. And then the New Yorker guy said, I share his pessimism. Try that one out. The head of the Haqqani network is now the head of security for Kabul. So who do you believe? Do you believe Biden that things are going to be things have been hunky-dory, things this last 2 weeks went hunky-dory, and things will continue to be hunky-dory in Afghanistan? Or do you believe the citizens who are still there who are fearing for their life? Or now we get reports of them trekking 1,000 miles across the Afghan mountains and desert to get to another country where it's also pretty dangerous too, but it's worth not staying. Who do you believe? Who do you believe? Do you believe Joe Biden? Or do you believe the Afghans who helped us for all these 20 years and their families who are desperate for their lives? Joe Biden says the Taliban's different. Yeah, I believe the people on the ground who know that that's not true. And Biden and the rest, they don't believe it either. They're lying to you again. Always have, always will. Biden was vice president for 8 years of the last 20, by the way. People forget that. The forever war, 20-year war. It's unbelievable. It's horrible. I can't believe we've done this. You were there for 8 of them. Lied to us then. But they don't care. They don't. They don't care. They'll continue to lie to you. They don't care. As Jesse Kelly said, it's all politics. It's all politics. Kurt Vonnegut wrote an essay, and he started out quoting Lord Acton, the line we all know, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It was from Lord Acton in the 1800s. But then Vonnegut said this. He said, human beings are chimpanzees who get crazy drunk on power. And by saying that our leaders are power-drunk chimpanzees, am I in danger of wrecking the morale of our soldiers fighting and dying in the Middle East? No, their morale, like so many bodies, is already shot to pieces. They are being treated, as I never was, like toys a rich kid got for Christmas. Our soldiers have been treated like toys that a rich kid got for Christmas. Grayson Quay, he said, our so-called leadership are spoiled rich children. And one of the toys that they broke was my friend and neighbor, Andy. He goes into a story about Andy, Staff Sergeant Andrew McCaffrey. 2003, Staff Sergeant lost his right arm in a grenade blast. Then he came home and learned how to shoot with his left hand, and then went back to Afghanistan on 3 separate deployments. He's the first soldier in Army history to be deployed after losing a limb. And his friend said that this was an act of courage, sacrifice, and dedication of which the politicians who sent him to war and the generals who commanded him were unworthy. An act of courage that the generals are unworthy of. Andrew came back home and he committed suicide just last August. His friend said, "I'm more worried for the souls of those who drove him to it. Unrepentant reprobates whose negligence and dishonesty spat in the face of Andy's sacrifice, botching the war, bungling the withdrawal, and then patting themselves on the back for doing it." And Biden coming out and saying it was all such a great success. These people. Generals, think tankers, talking heads, they've lied to you for 20 years about Afghanistan. Lied to you for 20 years. And Biden's still lying about how wonderful he did with the withdrawal. This Grayson Quay guy, he had such a good line. He said, "Our president did not realize that if you're being eaten by a tiger and you've managed to pry its jaws open, you should probably pull your head out before your hands." I still love that imagery. So imagine we got our head in the tiger's jaws, right? And we're able to pry open the jaws of the tiger. But then we let go with our hands before we get our head out. And that's what we did in Afghanistan. We let go, and the Taliban cut our head off. Pretty basic stuff. We couldn't even get the leaving part right. That's how much of a failure these guys are. Not our men and women on the ground, most certainly not. Guys at the top. Do you think we'll ever have an American general die in battle ever again? Think about that. Are we ever going to have an American general die in battle? Never. There's no skin in the game. Our soldiers are just toys that they play with, toys that they break. Andrew's friend, he said, who would agree to suffer for such a stupid, craven, inept excuse for an empire? How can we expect thousands of Andys to sacrifice what's best in them to what's worst in our society? And that's our leaders. They're what's worst in our society, telling our best what to do. One Afghanistan veteran, he said, "People can no longer bring themselves to love and serve a country that has dispensed with the pretense of loving and serving them. Unfortunately, no civilization can long endure without people willing to make such sacrifices. And if we want to keep ours, our country, we must strive to be worthy of those men and women and demand that our leaders do the same." What's one way of doing that? When you say leave no man behind, you mean it. Not, well, we got 90%. Even the Washington Post yesterday called it a moral disaster. They called this withdrawal a moral disaster that entirely, that's what they said, entirely falls on Mr. Biden and his administration. The Washington Post said that. So why does it matter? Why does it matter, leave no man behind? Why is that more than just a pithy little saying that everyone knows? Well, there's really important reasons. You have the moral obligation, but then you have the practical ones. Let's talk about the practical obligation. You don't leave a man behind because when you send our toy soldiers out to war, you want them to fight without having to worry that if they get caught behind enemy lines, they'll be abandoned. Our soldiers will not fight as hard knowing that if they get in trouble, it's over for them, and we leave them to die. Our men and women need to know that we will move heaven and earth to go get them. We will spend impractical amounts of money and take impractical amounts of risk to go find you because we will never leave a man behind. We'll do everything. We'll do all this. The helicopters, the money, the potential loss of life. Is all this worth it for one man? Yes, it is. Always. It's always worth it. You never leave a man behind. Bo Bergdahl was a traitor. He deserted his post in 2009, taken captive by the Taliban. We went to go get him, and 6 other soldiers were killed in the process of getting him. And there's a ton of unknowns about that whole thing. But the point is, we are even willing to send Americans and end American lives, risk American lives to go get a deserter. That's what we're willing to do. We talked to an Army Ranger yesterday who talked about the risk involved with going to get Marcus Luttrell and to pick up the bodies of the other Americans who died that day. If you're out there fighting and in the back of your mind, you think, geez, if I get captured, no one's coming for me, you're not going to fight as hard. You can't have that. That's for service members. Maybe it's a bit different for American citizens. But American citizens should have the same assurance that the American government, the American people, the American leadership is not going to leave you behind in a war zone that we just suddenly abandoned. This isn't rocket science. You get the citizens out, then the military leaves. You get your head out of the tiger's mouth, then you let go. 90% of the people out, bragging like that's some sort of success? That's not it at all. That's missing the mark. Biden never owned the failure, never took responsibility for even the role that he played. And don't fall for it. Just because Biden yelled at you yesterday about what a success it was, don't buy it. Don't let them undermine a core value of our country. Never leave a man behind. Don't ever abandon that value. Don't let them make this a new normal, where leaving 10% of men behind is acceptable, good enough. This is all part of the erosion from within. Add it to the pile of things that are eroding our country from within. No foreign enemy is ever going to take us out. The collapse is going to come from within. And this is part of it. Leave no man behind is essential to our country's survival. Our leaders have abandoned it, and they're patting themselves on the back for it. Coming up next, I want to talk about the American University of Afghanistan and the families of the 12 Marines and sailor who met with Joe Biden at Dover Air Base, and it did not go well. Talk about that next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. It's going to be a nightmare in Kabul for many people. Will the media report on it? That is the only question. Whether or not people are murdered, that's not a question. The media reports on it. The question. I want to talk about the American University of Afghanistan. They have 4,000 students and employees. It's a U.S.-funded group, obviously. They've often been under attack there. It's been a symbol of modernity and America there for the last 20 years. But people still show up on campus and teach and learn for its own sake. And the other day, the Taliban, I think it was one of the first things actually that they took over, the Taliban. And they raised the Taliban flag over the campus. There was a couple last-ditch efforts to get as many students as they could on a bus and get them to the airport, and they all failed. So all those students are going to die. Maybe what's even worse, and this is very similar to the last segment, where it's bad enough what our military leadership is doing to the toys, men and women on the ground, and then they pat themselves on the back for what a great job they do. Like that's the insult to the injury, right? Similarly here, the New York Times reported that the school gave the names of the university's students and professors to the U.S. military, and then the U.S. military gave those names to the Taliban. There's a 24-year-old female student. She said, the U.S. government told us, we've given your names to the Taliban. And she said, we're all terrified. That now there's no evacuation, there's no getting out. So who do you believe as to whether or not that was a good idea to give the names of Americans and Afghans to the Taliban? Was that a good strategic move, right? Because, the Taliban was in charge of the outer security of the airport, right? They were in charge of the different checkpoints, and they were helping us. They're in charge of protecting us, said the head of CENTCOM. The Taliban was in charge of protecting us. So we gave their names. We gave the names to the Taliban of Americans and people that we wanted to let through. So who do you believe about whether or not that was a good idea or a bad idea? Do you believe Joe Biden when he says it was a good idea? Do you believe, so he says this is a good idea, we needed to do it. Okay, Joe, do you believe him? Or do you believe a woman on the list? What she thinks about being on the list? I will much rather believe the person who's on the list as to whether or not it's a good idea. She thinks it's not. If this woman said, oh, thank goodness I'm on this list, now they'll let me go to the airport, thank you, Mr. Biden, that was a brilliant strategic decision, thank you so much, then I wouldn't say a word. I'd be like, oh, that was actually a pretty good idea. Instead, she's gonna be shot in the head as soon as they find her. And they know who she is. The Taliban posted a picture of on Twitter of them taking over the university. It's hard to see there, but it's like 12 guys there, and they all got their guns. And the translation of their tweet says, here, that's the front doors of the university. Here, wolves were trained in sheepskin against the Muslim Ummah, means community, and the religion of Islam. So here, wolves were trained against the Muslim community and Islam as they stand there with their guns. But we have assurances that the Taliban will treat them well. Because, the Taliban wants to be members of the world community, So they're not going to shoot all those people in the head. They're not going to shoot all those wolves and enemies to the Muslim community. No. They want to be in the world community. Of course they're going to be killed. 2016, the Taliban for 10 hours attacked the school. They killed 15 people, 7 students. That was 5 years ago. You think it's going to be different now? You think now they've changed? Just a real quick sidebar to put this into perspective. Imagine being a student at the American University of Afghanistan, and the Taliban comes and attacks your school every once in a while, and compare that to the crybabies on American college campuses who need safe spaces and safe rooms and whined because they didn't want to take their exams after George Floyd died. Or Donald Trump won the presidency, and the law students just can't take an exam. It's too traumatic. Meanwhile, a student at American University of Afghanistan said, our hopes and dreams have turned into dust. It's as if you throw a glass on a cement floor and your life shatters in a split second. But we're over here. I can't take the exam because Donald Trump won the presidency and life is so tough for me. It's so hard because of intersectionality. Give me a break. There were 2 major efforts to get the students out. The first one is they all went to a safe house, or as many as were in the know, went to a safe house for evacuation. They got there, and at the last second, it was called off. And then again, as I mentioned, they got on buses, and that was called off as well. We've never felt that helpless. Like no American could feel, you can't ever feel that helpless as they were at that moment. Maybe only to be matched by the helplessness of the parents of the Americans who were killed. Dover Air Base the other day, the dignified transfer, as it's called, their bodies coming home, grieving families who've never met each other before. And then after a bit of the ceremony, Biden, the president, the commander-in-chief comes up and meets with the families, one family at a time. You imagine. One mom took out a picture of her son and said, don't you ever forget that name. Don't you ever forget that face. And take some time to learn their stories. And Biden said, I do know their stories. Put yourselves the best you can in the shoes of these parents. You pretend you're either the mom or the dad or husband or wife, son or daughter of these young kids who were killed. So your son, your daughter, goes to Afghanistan, completely unnecessary, right? It's just military mistake after military mistake. The fact that it even requires sending 6,000 extra service members, right? The whole thing's so unnecessary. And then you have questions as to why our Marines were even outside of the gates in the first place, in a place where a terrorist could even attack them. We'll say that for another day. But then you get woken up, like one dad did at 2:40 in the morning, to a group of Marines outside your front door telling you that your son was killed. And then 2 days later, you meet with the commander-in-chief. Holy cow. So first, do you do it? Do you meet with Joe Biden? What would you do? Seriously, put yourself there best you can. What would you do? Would you do it? Would you meet with him? And if the answer is yes, what do you say? And here's what's interesting about the situation. Joe Biden has seen tragedy in his life. His wife and kids were in a car crash back in 1972. His wife died, and his, I think, 13-month-old daughter died in that car accident. His other two boys had a broken leg and a fractured skull. This was just the week before Christmas, 1972. It was right after he won his first Senate race. Actually, Joe took the oath of office from his boys' hospital room. He thought he was going to die in 1988 from brain aneurysms. His priest read him his last rites. And then his son, Bo, died in 2015 from brain cancer. He was deployed to Iraq, and they think that the brain cancer had something to do with his service over in Iraq. Now, Joe usually has this charming Irish thing that he can do. He can yuck it up with anyone. He's always been able to, right? Whenever there's been some sort of tragedy, he could talk about Bo and relate to the person who's going through a tough time. And he's done this. He's done this in pretty much every speech. He did yesterday, right? He talks about Bo. And it's always worked, but not anymore. Doesn't work anymore. And the big difference is that Joe isn't the helpless father anymore. He can't relate to the other parents and widows who are there because he's the person responsible for these deaths. Joe Biden is not a gold star father, and he needs to stop acting like one. It's insulting to pretend to be one to the families of the people who you sent off because of your mistakes. One family that met him was a Marine who got killed. His wife met him. They got married 6 months ago. Their newborn is due soon. This is the Marine's sister about Joe Biden. He said, "My dad and I did not want to speak to him. He can't possibly understand. You cannot kneel on our flag and pretend to care about our troops. You can't blank this up as bad as he did and say you're sorry. This did not need to happen. Every life is on his hands. The thousands of Afghans who will suffer and be tortured is a direct result of his incompetence." One dad said that he was far more consoled by the other members of the military who were there than by the commander-in-chief. By the way, the commander-in-chief who kept talking about his son and then also kept checking his watch. To the point where his families boarded the bus, one woman looked back and yelled across the tarmac, "I hope you burn in hell. That was my brother." And the dad of another fallen Marine said, "I can't falter for it." Coming up, we'll talk with one of our favorite guests who always has an inside look as to what's happening on the ground. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. A lot of people are wondering who's really running the show at the White House, and no one talks about the president's chief of staff. Here he is on MSNBC the other day.
it's easy to second guess. But let's just be clear. America was in this war for 20 years. And I think any effort to unwind that, any effort to bring our troops out, any effort to end our military presence in Afghanistan was going to be filled with heartbreaking scenes and difficulties. And I think the Biden administration has managed that as well as it could be managed under the circumstances we were placed in.
Yeah, they're the victims here. Lisa Daftari is here from foreigndesknews.com. Lisa, thanks for being here. Let's start here with that victimhood mindset, that this was everyone else's fault. Everything was a wonderful success. Everything went perfectly. And everything that went terribly was everybody else's fault, is the gist of it all.
Right.
I don't want this narrative to last that they're pushing. So could this all have been avoided, / what could have been done if we wanted to evacuate? How could this have been done better?
Right. So the White House has two go-to narratives. One is that we couldn't just stay there for another 50 years. We had to end this war, meaning our only two options were to evacuate the way that we did, without a strategy, without any responsibility, creating all these vulnerabilities, or the alternative would be, who wants another 50 years or endless war in Afghanistan? False narrative. And the second is to say, we inherited this. This was Trump's policy. He's the one who wanted to sit down with the Taliban. Well, how about all the other foreign policy moves that the Biden administration did a 180 on in the first 48 hours of coming into office? Well, they should have done a 180 on this as well. But that's even false, because the Trump administration did want to sit down with the Taliban, but under very different circumstances, and drawing a lot of ultimatums to try to get the Taliban to put down their weapons, not to inherit the $80 billion worth of nation building that we did in that country, including the arsenal of weapons that they inherited there. So this, it's not surprising that this White House is coming out with all of these excuses, this narrative building. For the most part, I would say that the mainstream media, surprisingly, is a bit skeptical. They're asking good questions at these press briefings, even though they're not getting any answers. But I think, we would have seen more outrage had there been a different president, not one that was just, pushed by popularity and by emotions. And now that's exactly how they're reacting to these senseless casualties in Afghanistan and the mess that we created there. And of course, the reverberations and the ripple effect that this will have for our national security, the region, and just terrorism as a whole.
I agree with you on the media, and it's very interesting that they've been as tough on Biden as they've been. And I don't know if it will last. Does Biden and all these people at the top, do they really, truly, deeply, behind closed doors, do they really believe that the Taliban is any different? Obviously, they're saying they are, and they're going to put intense pressure on them, and they're going to keep them from international markets. Like, the Taliban gives a crap about selling their homemade jam at Whole Foods or whatever. Like, I don't even know what that even means. They got China to help them out with anything that they need on that front. But does anyone in the White House think that the Taliban is really different?
I've always had this question, since the Obama administration, where they started, just bowing down to all of our enemies in the name of appeasement and in the name of diplomacy. And that's how they believed, or at least on the surface, wanted to come out and handle their foreign policy, which is extremely dangerous. We saw what 8 years of that appeasement foreign policy did to us, and how much how damaging it was on the war on terror. And then for 4 years, we had Donald Trump, who was just no BS. He was going to go and face our enemies in the way that enemies should be faced. So here we are again. And the question still goes, do they believe that the Iranian regime can be reformed? Do they believe that they can actually sit down with them and have a handshake? Do they believe that, we should go easy on China or North Korea or, any one of our enemies? And of course, the Taliban. Do they really believe that the Taliban is any different from ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of the others? And if they did, imagine how up in arms we were after 9/11, when you had a bunch of terrorists, Al-Qaeda, planning and plotting in caves, just very, very do-it-yourself, very, very basic, rudimentary style, and ISIS being even more rudimentary, working out of pockets in Syria and Iraq. And now you have an actual terror group that is in charge of a country with a flag and a military and weapons. And, here we are saying, Secretary of State Blinken came out the other day and said that the Taliban should earn global legitimacy and support. And that's a quote. And, I had to read that like 3 times, and it was late at night. I'm like, am I understanding this correctly? Our Secretary of State is actually, advocating for the Taliban to have world recognition. It's absurd. It's mind-boggling. And the question, to go back to what you said, is, do they really believe that this can happen, or is this just the way that they need to cover up the situation, that the way that they wanted it? Meaning, if President Biden inherited this Afghanistan situation on the 1 yard line, why did he fumble the way that he did? I was on a radio show yesterday, and the host asked me, it almost begs the question: had we not killed Osama bin Laden yet, and they had him on the 1 yard line, would this administration take out Osama bin Laden, or would the appeasement strategy, which is further to the left than President Obama's foreign policy, would they go after Osama bin Laden? And that's a great question. I think we are in a place where President Biden is not the President Biden, or not the Senator Biden, I should say, even though he was extremely, I know people are going to say, what did she say? Yes, he was extremely left, but this is a whole nother level. This is, the influence of the woke crowd, the influence of they're not our enemies, the influence of we can tame and work with terrorists, and it's a very, 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 very dangerous perspective to work from.
Yeah, I think they really, really want it to be true. It seems very naive. Is not even the beginning. It's like a ivory tower academic hallway view of it all, and they really, really want it to be true. Let's talk about what's next for the people there. So the question is, will the media? Okay, twofold. Will the Taliban actually go door to door and shoot people in the head? That's the first thing. Second, will our media cover it? Third thing, people are not leaving the Kabul airport. Like that's gone. So now they're trekking it across the country. Afghanistan's about the third the size of the United States, landmass-wise. They're surrounded by Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and a little tiny border with China, sort of. Where's people's best bet to go, and how difficult is that journey?
Yeah. So let's work from the beginning. Are they going to door to door? They have already started going door to door. Don't buy any of this. This is a new face of the Taliban. They're already told women not to go to work. They've already told women not to go to university. There will be no co-ed classrooms. They've already started, the morality police has started pulling people aside and whipping them for girls showing their toes and their sandals under their burqas. They're going door to door. They will not be, lax on any of the Sharia law that they want to apply, and particularly not be lenient against those who worked for the Afghan government, who are part of the Afghan resistance. It's already started. So will the media cover it? Great question. We will probably no longer have reporters on the ground there. This is a very short-lived situation. We're seeing Clarissa Ward and others, even females that are on the ground. Yeah, say goodbye to that. It's not going to be a safe place for these women to work. A, B, the good news, I would say, is that we have a lot of citizen journalism. So unless they cut their internet, we will get a lot of accounts from people's Twitters or sending me videos. I mean, I that's how I report out of Iran, for example. I'm not relying on the state media over there to tell me what's going on. I'm relying on people, and I get dozens and dozens of DMs daily of people sending me videos and screenshots of things that are going on there. And that's what we'll probably have to rely on. The Afghan people, who have become, increasingly courageous in their fight against the Taliban, they know what's coming up, right? They've had this, the influence of the Taliban there since the 90s. And they've been, a part of society, hovering over, and now they're in charge. So the people know very well what's going on, and that's why they're heading for the borders, and that's why they're trying to get out. And to your question about Kabul airport, the original, instinct of people was get yourself to Kabul, get yourself to the airport, and get out of the country. And of course, the streets and the routes to the airport are lined with Taliban fighters. The perimeter of the airport is, of course, fortified by Taliban fighters, and it's no longer the way out. So, and the other thing we have to remember is the evacuation is not just from Kabul. This is a vast country with, we have Americans in all different places. We have our allied servicemen and women in different places. And of course, we have Afghans who want to get out in all different places. And we have to think about the minority groups, the marginal groups, the LGBTQ community, the religious minorities, those who feel that because they worked for the government or because they helped the United States, they're going to be threatened as well. All those people are trying to get out. And the bordering countries are very, very hesitant, if not plain out saying no, like Turkey has closed its borders. Uzbekistan is teetering on closing its borders. So the people really don't have too many outlets, too many places to find safe haven. And don't listen to the people who are tweeting online. Well, the Taliban are wonderful, just like they tried to tell us that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt were wonderful, because they do put up soup kitchens and do hand out checks, and they do try to get a certain segment of the population, usually the lower socioeconomic brackets, to follow them. Don't fall for it. People are heading for the borders. They won't get out.
Listen, they've been lying for 20 years to us about the war in Afghanistan. They're not going to start telling the truth now. Lisa Daftari, foreigndesknews.com. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you. As always, true story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I've been saying for weeks now that Afghanistan and COVID are the same thing. They're the same story in many, many different ways. And add to the list, they're the same because they both end up with killing dogs. Right? In Australia, the local town told the police to go shoot a bunch of dogs in the head at the animal shelter, kill them because they didn't want people to leave their house, the volunteers to leave their house to go take care of the dogs. And then in Afghanistan, perhaps you've seen the picture of the dogs left behind at the airport. Now, initial reports were, at least maybe initial assumptions, were that these were military dogs. But some people are saying, oh no, they were just dogs at like a local animal shelter in Kabul. I don't know, but let's get to the bottom of this and talk dogs in this segment. Justin Goodman is here. He's from the White Coat Waste Project. Justin, how are you, brother?
Great, thanks for having me, Mike.
Do you have any insight into the dogs in Afghanistan? Do you have any idea what those dogs were, what was going on there?
No, I was listening to you talk, and I've heard the same reports. People initially thought they were working dogs. Apparently, the DoD has said they're not. They are strays or sheltered dogs. Either way, it looks like dogs were left in the lurch, and potentially it's the government's fault, the U.S. government's fault. And that's the same thing we're dealing with Anthony Fauci as well.
Okay, tell us this story.
So I think a lot of people by now have heard about Fauci funding experiments in Wuhan that may have caused the pandemic, which I believe caused the pandemic. Many others believe caused the pandemic. But he actually has a $6 billion bloated budget, Fauci alone, within the NIH. And he's responsible for an enormous amount of government waste and abuse, including torturing dogs in experiments both in the United States and we've just discovered and released yesterday also in Africa. So Anthony Fauci's division at the NIH late last year commissioned a study at the University of Georgia where they are infecting dogs with parasites, injecting them with experimental drugs and killing them. The photo you're looking at right now is a study funded by Fauci over in Tunisia, where he spent $375,000 to lock those dogs in those mesh cages and then fill those cages with infected sandflies that are basically eating the dogs alive on their ears. That the flies prefer to bite the dog's ears. So they starve these flies and then they set them loose in these cages to infect these dogs with a tropical disease.
Okay, I got some questions.
Yeah.
Why? Let's go. Let's take it from like the scientific perspective. Like, why would you say they're beagles? Why beagles? And what's the research hopefully going to? What problem is it going to solve if all things go well in the end?
Sure. So first question, why beagles? If you visit the Health and Human Services website, which is the umbrella agency over Anthony Fauci's division, they actually have an entry on there that discusses why they choose beagles. And it's because they're docile and small. So that means they're easy to abuse. They don't fight back. They're little friendly dogs, and you can do what you want with them. In terms of the science side of this, the experiments in the United States are completely unnecessary. They said that they're testing a vaccine in these dogs, a human vaccine in these dogs, but the FDA has said that they do not require testing on dogs. This vaccine has already been tested extensively in other animals, including dogs. And you have other agencies like the VA and the EPA that under the Trump administration have moved away from using dogs. You have Anthony Fauci, once again, not following the science and wasting, I think the number is $425,000 on these unnecessary and wasteful dog experiments where
I got one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. I got 1 minute. Why Tunisia?
That's a great question. We found that a lot of objectionable animal experimentation that couldn't happen in the United States has been offloaded to other countries where there's less oversight. So we're sending the money there. We actually have virtually no oversight of what happens. We don't do inspections of these laboratories. We don't see how the money is being spent. We just take their word for it. And you know, what these photos show is exactly what the NIH doesn't want people to see, is that they're torturing dogs at taxpayer expense and unnecessary experiments.
Just like we do with gain-of-function experiments in bats in China. Amazing.
Exactly.
Justin Goodman, White Coat Waste Project. Justin, thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, man. That's just the theme of it all, isn't it? Just the callousness, the lying, nonstop, zero accountability. That's what it all comes down to in the end. Listen, I guess the big picture story here is don't trust people like this ever in your life personally. And don't be a person like that, right? Be a person who is accountable, holds themselves accountable, is honest and humble. Be a good person, not like our leaders. True story. Spread the word.